Well, good morning. It's great to be with you this morning. My name is Bryan. I'm one of the pastors here, and this is one of those mornings where I feel like we've already had church. It's a great morning of worship. It's also the kids in here gathered together. If we've not met, one of my roles here is I work with small groups, and so I would really encourage you, this is my shameless plug because I've got a microphone and I can say what I want. So join a small group. Man, I would love to connect with you over a small group. My friend Richard's going to be in the lobby afterwards. Would love to connect with you and get you hooked up in a small group. It's one of the best ways to be known and to grow in your faith. We don't do this faith journey alone. So that's my plug. So earlier this week, I got in my office and I sat down to focus on one thing, this hard task I had to get done for the day. And I don't know if you're like me, but when I have a really difficult task to do, I start off early in the morning with it. It's when my brain is the most focused, and so I had this one thing that I was focused on, and man, I was laser focused on it. I began. And then there was a knock on my door. Person just came in and they just had a quick question for me. So now I've got this thing I want to focus on, but then I've got this question being asked. It was an easy question, but it was really difficult to answer. So we had to sit there and dialogue around it, and the whole time we're doing this, I'm trying to think about the one thing that I need to focus on that I can get done while being interrupted with a question that would seem to be like it was going to be easy, but it ended up being a 10-minute phone conversation. And right after the person left my office, there's this residual effect that was happening with me where I was focusing on this one thing, but now I was thinking about that question that they asked, and then I had this calendar meeting reminder ding on my phone. It was a meeting I needed to go to that I totally forgot about. You know what's going to happen. So I started focusing on the calendar meeting, and I'm also thinking about that conversation that I had with the person, and then there's that one thing that I needed to get to, and I'm like working, and I get over to the meeting, and I've never done this before on stage. Anyway, there goes my email. There's the meeting I was in. Thank you. So now I'm at this meeting. I'm trying to think about the one thing I needed to get done, but I was in this meeting, and then right in the middle of the meeting, I'm not even joking, right in the middle of the meeting, a fire alarm goes off. Right in the middle of the meeting, there's a fire alarm going off, and it's beeping incessantly, and it's telling us to get out of the building. Now it was just, luckily it was just, they were testing it. But that's the way my morning started. I was all over the place. I had the one thing to get accomplished, this one difficult task that I started my morning with. It was lunchtime, and I hadn't even got it done. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt like you had these distractions going on in your life? And you're attempting to multitask. It's a little bit like juggling. Like you're just trying to get this one task accomplished. And you're bombarded with text messages, maybe knocks on your door, or emails, alarms, DMs, BeReals, group meets, WhatsApps, and on and on and on. Do you ever just feel exhausted maybe by it? Today we're going to be talking about how when we attempt to rest, we've been in this series of rest, Sabbath, stopping. When we attempt to rest, we end up getting distracted oftentimes, and we end up multitasking. Like if rest is the activity, rest is the thing you're doing, if you're doing anything else other than resting, you're multitasking. A simple definition of multitasking is attempting to do more than one task at a time. There's been a lot of research done on multitasking. And this research points to when we multitask, it actually slows down productivity. We don't get as much done as we think we do. It causes mistakes in our work, so there's more mistakes. Now those mistakes have to be fixed, all because we weren't focused. We were distracted. So not only are we not as productive and we make more mistakes, get this. Research shows that when you're focused on that one thing, one task, you're in deep thought, you're working hard at it. When you get interrupted in some way with an email, a text message, a knock on your door, and you get distracted, it takes you probably heard this research before, 9 minutes to get back to the same level of focus that you had before you got distracted. 9 minutes goes by before you're able to regain central focus. So if we quick do the math, the average person gets over 100 emails a day, and sometimes in 2 different accounts. The average person receives 35 to 50 text messages, including DMs, in a single day. If you're under the age of 24, that number goes up to almost 100. That's 100 forms, 200 forms of interruptions in a single day that happens to us. What this means for us is a single task, something that should take maybe an hour to complete, will end up taking all day to get done because of multitasking. I know because it happened to me this week. The one thing I needed to focus on, I wasn't able to because I was multitasking throughout my entire morning. So isn't it interesting when we attempt to rest, to take Sabbath, to focus on rest, we almost can't do it? Did you know our brains were built to focus on one thing at a time? One thought. That's how our brains were designed. Just like the way our eyes work, our eyes can only focus on one thing at a time. We can see things in our periphery, but we can really only dial in and focus on one thing. Our brains are the same way. Multitasking in our society is a problem. We have divided attention, sometimes with no focus. A more robust definition comes from the author Walter Brueggemann about multitasking. He says this about multitasking: the drive to be more than we are, to control more than we do, to extend our power and effectiveness. What he's speaking to is multitasking is really about our egos, thinking we can get more done than we actually can. And multitasking may seem like we're accomplishing a lot, but we're actually not. Now, I know some of you are in here, you're like questioning me. You're like, no, Bryan, you don't know me, man. I'm really good at multitasking. Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but research says you're not. You're not as good as you think you are. You're not the exception. And neither were the children of Israel. They weren't the exception either. God's chosen people were not the exception to this. In the book of Exodus, we know that God commanded the Israelites to rest, to take Sabbath, to stop working. Work 6 days and then rest, to focus on rest. Rest alone. But just like us, they struggled deeply in how to do that. They were looking for any kind of loophole so that they could get out of taking Sabbath. In the book of Amos, Amos is a prophet, and Amos is noticing that the Israelites on Sabbath were not resting. And a prophet was just somebody that spoke for God. Like, hey, God kind of telling me this, y'all aren't taking Sabbath. Well, then here's how the Israelites reply to him. Well, when will the new moon be over so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath over so that we may offer wheat for sale? They're supposed to be taking Sabbath, focusing on rest, that be the thing, but then they begin to multitask. God's saying to the Israelites, take rest, Sabbath. They can't do it. What they're saying is, let's stop taking Sabbath so we can be productive. Let's get some things done. And it's not wrong to sell wheat and grain and all those things and be productive. God just says, hey, it's healthy to stop work, to rest, to cease and desist. But their attention's divided. They have no boundaries around rest. They weren't resting. Some would say they were actually restless. They wanted to get back to work. They wanted to make money. And I wonder if for some of us, that defines what we experience when we attempt to stop, to take Sabbath. We don't actually experience rest. We experience more of a restlessness. We can't focus on rest while we're on Sabbath if we're restless. We can't do it. And what's fascinating is research shows There's a reason we experience restlessness when we attempt to stop. The author Cal Newport, in his book Deep Work, writes about this. He says, jobs are actually easier to enjoy than free time or rest or Sabbath, we can put that in there, because jobs have built-in goals, feedback rules, and challenges, all of which encourage one to become involved in one's work, to concentrate, to lose oneself in it. But free time or Sabbath or rest, on the other hand, is unstructured and requires much greater effort to be shaped into something that can be enjoyed. I'm going to leave that quote up there for a little bit. I just want you to read back through that. This is why it's so difficult for us to rest. There's no reward in it. It's in our nature to be productive, right? Jobs give us these goals, tasks to accomplish. And then we get this reward, right? When we accomplish a task, and whether you enjoy your task you're doing or not, you get some kind of reward. I hope you get some kind of a paycheck. But that's how we're wired. Task, reward, task, reward. Well, rest doesn't have any of that in it. So what happens when we attempt to rest? We get restless. We feel the restlessness in our bones. It's what we end up doing when we attempt to stop. We end up making a list so we can feel productive. For many of us, we have no boundaries around rest. We almost welcome any distraction that comes our way. Meaningful rest comes with boundaries. If we want that meaningful rest, meaningful Sabbath, a break, then we have to place boundaries to be able to do that. The kind of rest that God calls us to will require deliberate practice. It will require planning. And to begin, we have to ask ourselves this question this morning, what is it that distracts you from rest? Think about it. When you're trying to rest, trying to take Sabbath, what is it that distracts you? What is it, the thing that pops up maybe in your mind or whatever it might be that distracts you from being able to rest? Can you name that? Can you put a name to it? And likewise, what might it look like to establish a boundary to remove that distraction from your life so that you are able to take Sabbath, so that you are able to rest? I'm not sure what it is for you. I know for me, I feel like, for whatever reason, I feel like I have to be available all the time. So maybe what I would say to myself, if that's you feel that like I have to be available for people. A tip for us is to become unavailable. To be unavailable. Make yourself unavailable. I know that's hard. Even as I say it, I'm saying, but what if somebody needs me? What if something comes up? Be unavailable. I started to practice this week. I put a sign on my door that says, "Thank you." Isn't that polite? It was amazing. I didn't get any knocks on my door at all. Make yourself unavailable, whatever you have to do. So now if someone sees that sign, they don't just come knock on my door. They allow me that space so that I can focus. Some experts say you can also just set a timer for 60 minutes, where you set everything aside, knowing that when the time is up, I'm going to be beeped, so I know when it's over, and then engage in some form of rest. Now, I know for some of you, you're like, did you see all the kids up here, Bryan? Okay? I need to be available to them, right? Like, I get it. I get it. But maybe talk with your partner. Try to figure out, is there a way that I can become, for even a moment of time, unavailable? We are not so important that we have to be available 24/7. If it helps, maybe relocate. Change your environment. You're in an office, maybe get out of the office. Maybe go home. If you're at home and you're distracted, or whatever that might be, maybe you need to go to the office. That might be helpful. Wherever it is you can be, maybe relocate so that you'll able to find rest. Because rest will require deliberate practice. It will require planning. It doesn't just happen. You know why I think just happens is multitasking and distractions happen. So practicing rest will require deliberate practice. And then unplug. Unplug. Stop checking email. Silence your phone. Shut off from all forms of connectivity. I know that's so difficult. I started this practice where I take my smartwatch off and I take my phone and I set it aside. And when you first do that, it's a bizarre feeling. You ever heard of ghost messaging? Where you're like, oh, I think I got a message. Nope, I didn't. Ever done that? We are so conditioned. There's this pattern that happens where it's like, well, we'll get a message. I'm important. I gotta check that. But unplug, recognizing how difficult it can be to disconnect. So I want to tell you about a case study I ran across recently about taking Sabbath. This case study comes from Harvard Business School professor Leslie Perlow. She wrote a book entitled, get this, Sleeping with Your Smartphone. She's a researcher, principal researcher for Harvard, and her research is on work-life balance. Okay, so that's where she's coming from, work-life balance, that concept and idea. So she writes about her work with a Boston consulting group. They hired her because their employees were experiencing burnout. Ever experienced that? Feeling like you're just getting burnt? These were people that absolutely loved their work. They loved their jobs, but they were experiencing burnout. They were making mistakes. Their work didn't bring them joy anymore. And so the company reaches out to Leslie, and it's like, what would you have us do? So she suggested an experiment. So she says to this Boston consulting group, she says, I want all your employees one day during the work week to completely disconnect from all forms of communication. No form of communication with clients, no form of communication with other employees, to completely disconnect. Don't respond to email, put an out of office email on, shut your phone down, silence your phone. Well, you can imagine this consulting group is like, whoa, like, we are in-demand people. They had a ton of what ifs. Well, what if a client needs this? And what if another employee has a question? I got to respond. Like, that's the world we live in. But she's like, trust me on this. Take a break. One day a week. Completely disconnect. I mean, it doesn't even seem possible, right? One day a week. What she's saying is disconnect. Take Sabbath. So reluctantly, this consulting group did this. They listened to her experiment. They followed through. And not surprisingly, all the employees reporting taking one day to be disconnected and not responding 24/7 to emails and messages, they felt more refreshed, they had more energy, and they were able to focus deeply on their work. And Leslie Perlow writes, in her research, she's shown somewhere along the way, this idea appeared that we have to stay connected via email and messaging 24/7. It's going to help improve our business to be that connected. And what research is finding is it does not. One day a week to unplug. One day a week of rest, to draw a boundary around rest, to be deliberate about it. It's almost as if God understood what we needed. A day of rest, feeling more refreshed, making yourself unavailable, and unplugging from technology. Rest will require that deliberate practice to keep us from multitasking by establishing boundaries. God designed us with boundaries in mind, a day of rest. We know that the benefits reduce our stress. Taking the Sabbath reminds us that we are more than what we produce. The Sabbath tells us that we don't have to give in to the demands of the world around us all the time. And probably most importantly, in how God designed us to rest, is so that we can connect deeper and draw closer to our Creator that loves us dearly. Amen. Will you go to God in prayer with me? God, as we bow before you this morning, it's often, there's so many distractions in our life that keep us from having that rest that you established for us. God, forgive us in the ways that we think we're beyond rest, like we don't need it. Like we're so valuable, that we're so important. God, help us to be a people that rests. Help us to be a people that connects with you, because we know that connection will bring life, the abundant life you've called us to. It's in your Son's name we pray, amen.